Kensington Palace in London is a working royal residence. Of great historical importance, Kensington Palace was the favourite residence of successive sovereigns until 1760. It was also the birthplace and childhood home of Queen Victoria. Today Kensington Palace contains the offices and London residences of the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. It also contains the offices and residences of the Duke and Duchess of Gloucester. The Duke and Duchess. In 1689 William III bought the Jacobean mansion Kensington Palace, originally known as Nottingham House, from his Secretary of State, the Earl of Nottingham, and commissioned Christopher Wren to extend and improve the house. Until the death of George II in 1760, Kensington Palace was the favourite residence of successive sovereigns. Historic parts of Kensington Palace are open to the public. Kensington Palace is also home to the Royal Ceremonial Dress Collection, with items of royal, ceremonial and court dress dating from the 18th century to the present day. In 1689 William III bought the Jacobean mansion Kensington Palace, originally known as Nottingham House, from his Secretary of State, the Earl of Nottingham, and commissioned Christopher Wren to extend and improve the house. Until the death of George II in 1760, Kensington Palace was the favourite residence of successive sovereigns. Queen Victoria was born and brought up in the palace, and news of her accession in 1837 was brought to her there by the Lord Chamberlain and the Archbishop of Canterbury. However, Victoria chose to reign from Buckingham Palace. It had been expected that Victoria would reign from either Kensington or St James's Palace, but almost immediately she moved to Buckingham Palace and never again stayed at Kensington Palace. Queen Mary, grandmother of the present Queen, was born at Kensington Palace in 1867. The Duke of Edinburgh stayed there in his grandmother's apartment in 1947 between his engagement and his marriage. Today, the state rooms are open to the public and managed by the independent charity Historic Royal Palaces, a non-profit organization that does not receive public funds. The offices and private accommodation areas of the palace remain the responsibility of the royal household and are maintained by the Royal Household Property Section. The palace also displays many paintings and other objects from the royal collection. By the end of the 19th century, the state rooms were severely neglected. The brickwork was decaying and the woodwork was infested with dry rot. Calls were made for the palace to be demolished, but Queen Victoria declared that while she lived, the palace in which she was born should not be destroyed. In 1897, Parliament was persuaded to pay for the restoration, which was completed 2 years later. The state rooms were open to the public on the Queen's birthday, the 24th of May 1899. This began the palace's dual role as a private home to royalty and a public museum. Queen Mary was instrumental in opening the state apartments as a temporary location for the London Museum, now known as the Museum of London, from 1911 to 1914. The state apartments were filled with showcases, some containing hundreds of objects including 18th-century costumes and dresses worn by Queen Victoria, Queen Alexandra and Queen Mary. The museum returned from 1950 to 1976 before it moved to its permanent home on London Wall. In 1989, care for the Kensington Palace state rooms was contracted out to Historic Royal Palaces Agency, a non-departmental public body, on behalf of the Department of the Environment. Historic Royal Palaces Agency became an independent charity in 1998 called Historic Royal Palaces. It receives no public or Crown funds and is therefore dependent on charitable giving for management of the site. Under Historic Royal Palaces, the Kensington Palace state rooms underwent a 2-year, £12 million renovation, underwritten with contributions from the Heritage Lottery Fund as well as other public and private donations. New uniforms for staff were designed by Stuart Stockdale at Jaeger. The reopening of the palace occurred in time for the Diamond Jubilee of Queen Elizabeth II in 2012. Visitors now can choose 4 different routes throughout the palace that offer exhibits incorporating cutting-edge digital presentations. interactive experiences, and even audio sequences that bring to life the gatherings of gowns, antique furniture, and other memorabilia of notable residents of the palace, including William and Mary in the Queen's State Apartments, the court of George I and II in the King's State Apartments, and the life of Queen Victoria in the rooms most associated with her. The fourth exhibit displays selections of Queen Elizabeth's wardrobe in the 1950s, Princess Margaret from the 1960s and 70s, and Diana, Princess of Wales, in the 1980s during their fashion heyday. The grounds of the palace were also renovated with enhancements including eliminating railings, fences, and shrubs that had undermined royal gardener Charles Bridgman's original landscaping. 2 new public gardens to the south and east of the palace were installed that connect the property to Kensington Gardens. The nearest tube stations are Queensway, Bayswater, High Street Kensington, or, slightly farther, Gloucester Road.